My work's heavily influenced by any kind of social engagement I do or community art. So I do lots of projects where I'm paid as an artist to go and work with a group, and that group is often a group who might be marginalised or maybe not access kind of culture and the arts on a regular basis. So I develop a relationship and a rapport with that group, and they often influence the kind of work that I make. So then there's kind of reciprocal sort of creative process going on there. And because my art's print-based, printmaking comes from industry. You know, printmaking in the fine art terms only came about because of the industry, because of the need to get printed material and printed matter out there, and it had a function and a purpose. So I always go back to those roots, those core roots of printmaking, and use printmaking to either get messages out there or to have a function and a usefulness to other people, or to express something which I guess other people can engage with on many levels, rather than just looking at a pretty picture and thinking, oh, that's a nice thing to look at. It has to kind of resonate, I guess, in some ways with people. I did a degree in fine art at the University of East London about, coming on 20 years ago now. I graduated, and it was probably in my second year I realised I wasn't really a painter, and that's what I'd gone in to do, to become a painter. And I also sensed that the space to kind of hang out in was the print studio, because there was loads of people in there working. It was a really social space. Where we had our studios as painters, we'd be kind of cut off from everyone else. So I would just go in, day out, not really see anyone, and just paint until I had a tutorial and I'd talk to someone. So it wasn't like a natural way of working for me. I'm definitely a sociable person. So hanging out in the print studio, there was like mixed experience printmakers. We'd have first years, MA students, PhD students, but crucially you'd have technicians there. So they would be there passing on their skills. And I just got into it that way. I just started off with etching, screen printing, and then just never left. I do like the process, and I did like having conversations with other printmakers who would kind of tell you everything about it. So if you look at etching's a very old technique, but not old in the sense of, like, say, Japanese woodblock printing or even wood engraving. It's old in the sense that what we do now hasn't changed in 500 years, and I love that. I love that kind of connection with heritage and history. You know, we use the same kind of materials to put a ground on a plate. We use the same design printing presses. You know, why change anything? If it still works, why change it? The only changes we might have made in the past sort of 20, 30 years is to make chemicals and substances less toxic, so it's better for the environment. You know, people who are sensitive and got allergies can use things safely. I guess the Festival of Thrift, because this year in 2017 it's at Kirkleatham Museum, which is a fantastic space in itself, but it also allows the artists who are taking part to use the museum archive and explore the grounds and use the influences from there to, I guess, direct the work that we make. So that's been really quite exciting to be able to do that. From my perspective, I took part in the Festival of Thrift back in 2013 when it was at Linkfield Point in Darlington. And the commission there was to engage the public in some kind of activity. And I'd proposed, along with another artist called Kay Henderson, to collect people's thrifty tips. And what we did was we used traditional letterpress printing and showed people how to write their thrifty tip using letterpress printing. And we printed them and we hung them up to dry. And then we exchanged them with other people who came along and they had their thrifty tips. So we collected something like 200 thrifty tips. So as part of the Festival of Thrift 2017, I wanted to kind of revisit that idea because it had legs. That those 2 days of being on site had legs in the sense that afterwards the credit union in Darlington contacted me to say, can we use these thrifty tips? Can we put them online? Because these are really good. It's all about how you save money, how you avoid spending money. So they used them. And then the copies that I had left over, I made into books. I stitched them into artist books, and I've been sending them around the world to be exhibited and sold in different countries since then. So it's continued on since then. So it's quite clear I wanted to revisit that idea of let's share these thrifty tips, because they've obviously had some use to some people, but then let's combine that with something in the archives, something in the stores that I come across that I can bring together and make something new and original to me. So I was really excited when I went into the stores to see a beautiful Adana printing press, which is a small platen press that lots of people would have had, mainly blokes, back in the sort of 50s, 60s, and it's what you would have printed your little invitations with, and you know, everybody kind of had them in the house. There was one of those, and then at the back of the stores I found these beautiful trays and trays of type, huge big bits of wooden types. I thought, right, that's definitely what I'm going to be using. And then also in the library I came across some really beautiful books which referenced the print industry. So they had a whole book which showed you all the different types of printing presses throughout the ages, right up until the sort of modern day, which was in the sort of 60s, 70s, offset lithography presses. So I've combined the text that I had from 2013, those thrifty tips using wooden type, with some images taken from the archives now, and I'm using them in a printing process called screen printing, and I'm using some letterpress printing, and I'm using original type from the archive to print from. And I've made, for the latest edition, I've made a series of broadsides. So broadsides were, originally they were printed onto one sheet of paper, and they date from sort of 16th century right up into the 19th century, and it's how we got our news. They would be printed, posted around town, sometimes there'd be proclamations, there'd be advertisements, and it's how we got our news. So I've made these kind of sheets which give you an indication of the news that I'm sharing, and it's all the thrifty tips it's some of the selected thrifty tips that I was attracted to at the time. And then for the exhibition, so the exhibition's going to be touring in various places, I wanted to, I guess, reference the industry that is kind of predominant of the Redcar area, but not be too kind of obvious with it. And I've always been intrigued by cable reels. I love cable reels in the sense that they could be reconfigured into artist books. You know, if you think of artist books, which can be defined as books made by artists or an art object in its own right. It could be something like the Lindisfarne Gospel. That could be an artist book. It's made by hand, it's decorated by artists. But artist books can also be something not necessarily paper-based or printed even. They can be some kind of receptacle for information. That's how I kind of see them, repositories of some sort. So I wanted to take some cable reels and turn them into some kind of artist book object. So they're not necessarily things that you can pick up and read, but it does have connections with paper and printed material. It'll have a narrative in there somewhere, but it's a sculpture object as well. So I'm busy exploring those at the minute. So they'll have a scroll-like quality to them. You know, scrolls, you know, were kind of original kind of book format designs where the paper would be wrapped around two kind of wooden sticks or so 2 bits of bamboo or whatever, and then pulled out. My kind of cable reel scrolls will have the paper hanging down so it swirls around, but then I'm using paper that has a transparent quality to it, whether that's tracing paper or a nice Japanese paper, so you can see that it's been printed onto both sides, and the viewer will be able to look at the paper and have hints or kind of glimpses of some of the thrifty tips or some of the equipment that would have been used originally to print this kind of material. With the Festival of Thrift, what's been really nice to address is the space that we're using. The pavilion space is kind of a non-gallery space, so it doesn't have that kind of white cube intimidation in a way, which is a good thing, I think. So you can kind of make your work so public can come in and look at it and go, oh, that's interesting, what's that? Oh, they're cable reels. But they'll see straight away that the cable reels have been turned into a piece of artwork. So it has that direct connection with recycling and reusing. So hopefully that'll be a big attraction as people come in. And because the cable reels are quite big, you know, they're not like these tiny little bobbins. They are quite big. They're at least sort of 30 centimetres by diameter, 40 centimetres high. And there's a number of them, so you can create some quite interesting installations so you can see the different perspectives. So people can come in and look at them and be curious about them. And I think that's something that I'm often interested in, because I work a lot with museums and kind of archival material, and that kind of triggers that curiosity with me. So I want viewers to have a little bit of curiosity as to what's that, why have they done that? And if they have those questions, even if they're unanswered, that's fine, as long as they have those questions.
My name is Becky Harper. I'm an illustrator based in York. I grew up in Middlesbrough, and most of my work is inspired by science and nature and everyday observations. I normally work with watercolour, painting and drawing, but on this project I have branched out and I've been experimenting with ceramics. My work typically explores characters in a situation, often a little bit quirky, often a little bit funny. They're normally doing something maybe mischievous. It can be people, children, animals, normally getting themselves into trouble. I've always been interested in art from a very, very young age, and I've continued to draw throughout my childhood, throughout school and college, and then I went to art college. I went to CCAD and did an art foundation, and then that led me to Bristol University of the West of England, where I studied a degree in illustration, and since then I've just always been pursuing the creative industry. I've worked with Navigator North before. It was a couple of years ago, and I took part in the NICE programme, which helped support emerging artists. And it was really useful for me to do that after university, because I felt that gave me the skills to create artwork, and the NICE programme gave me the skills to be an artist and market myself as an artist. So I'd worked with Navigator North before, and I saw an advert on Facebook, I think, and I also got an email, and I thought I'll just apply for it and see what happens, and I was chosen, and it's really good because there's a small group of artists and everyone's really different, and it's really good to work with other artists and feed off each other ideas and inspiration, and it's nice to be working with other people, because as an artist sometimes you can work a lot by yourself. So it's good to have feedback from others. So I've been mentored by Alex Sicklin, who I do know from a few years ago. She used to live in York, so I do know her. She's an illustrator and a ceramicist, and even though our work is very different, I think we probably appreciate each other's work and the effort that goes into it. I'm a big fan of her stuff. So the work for latest edition has been inspired by colonies, and the idea that you'll have lots of small organisms that make up a larger one. So they'll work together and it's almost like one entity, but it's lots of little things working together. I've been looking at bees and how they interact with each other, and I've created an installation. I've made up lots of small bees, which when they're hung together will almost look like one entity. So from a distance it might look like one large loose object, but as you get closer you'll see it's made up of lots of individual ones to create a superorganism. And with this piece in particular, I suppose the idea, which hopefully comes across, is the idea of lots of individuals who might seem insignificant on their own can all work together for the greater good as a superorganism. And I suppose it potentially a little bit political, because maybe you'll look at it and think about your role in society and how working together we can make things better for future generations. So I already had the idea of the bees before we visited Kirkleatham, but we were allowed access to the stores, and I looked at some of the old propaganda posters, which has definitely inspired the limited edition. It was really good to see those, so much interesting stuff. So it's still exploring the subject matter of bees, and I've created a gold foil print, and with that it's encouraging people to help the bees, because they've been suffering in recent years and they're very, very important to our ecosystem. I'm not sure we would survive for very long without them. So the centre panel of the edition, it's inspired by a call to arms. So bees are actually made up primarily of females. They do everything, and there's just a few males who help breed and, you know, continue the population. But it is female bees that do all of the work. So the middle panel is inspired by the war effort, when the women had to fill in and do all of the men's jobs when they went away to war. So the bees were essentially the original women's land army. The centrepiece is essentially a call to arms to help save the bees, and the two side panels are based on seed packets, and it's saying if you plant these seed packets, it will help. It will help. The more variety of wildflowers and bee-friendly plants that we have in our gardens and cities, that's all going to help to drive up the population. I suppose with my work, it's more towards the general public anyway. The thing that I like about illustration, it's very narrative, it's very pictorial. It's pictures, it's images. People can certainly read things into them, they can have a message behind them, but a lot of the time it is what it is. I'm not normally conceptual, so this work is a little bit more conceptual for me, but I definitely feel illustration can be quite accessible to the general public. It's mainly picture book illustrators. I've got a very big collection of children's books at home, and I love just sitting and going through them, and the colours and the textures and the forms and the compositions and the characters as well. So there's artists that I really like, Oliver Jeffers, Emily Gravett, to name a few, who just create these really beautiful characters in lots of different ways as well. I think each artist has their own way of working, you know, to add colour and develop their ideas and characters. And I think the thing that I admire is how diverse the field is, but they can still evoke such emotion, even though these are stories that are normally created for children. Even as a grown-up, I definitely think you can appreciate them. I have a website. I'm on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can email me. I'm hoping to open up an online shop. I've got some work that I would like people to buy if they want to. So I'm going to work on an online shop. I did York Open Studios last year, and I have applied to do it again this year. So fingers crossed. I think it's really good when people can come and see where the artist works, where they live often. People like to be nosy.
I'd always done little bits and bobs of sewing and arty bits, I suppose. And then I decided that I was going to try and make more of a go of it, and realised that I loved freehand embroidery and that other people quite liked it too, so it was quite saleable. That's kind of where it took off. Started making cushions and sort of little commissions for people and personalised stuff with my own designs on, and just sort of gone from there. Yeah, that was 4 years ago. Well, I love the local industry. I've done a bit of work about that before. I love pylons and sort of structure, and I'm interested in how nature lives alongside that and grows in amongst it, and the contrast between the two things. So when this came up, I thought it was perfect because of where the setting is at Kirkleatham, at South Gare, with the nature reserve and of course the steelworks. I thought, what better than this, really? Yeah. It's a little bit about the people of Redcar as well, and the loss of the steelworks, how they're moving on, and a little bit, but not too political. It's about hope, I think, about the future, and that things move on and they develop, and that mostly things survive and change and adapt, and whatever happens, whatever negative thing happens. Part of the inspiration was a poem by Emily Dickinson, Hope is a Thing with Feathers, and I thought that summarised really well what I was trying to portray with my work about the closure of the steelworks and how the people of Redcar are still such positive, bright people moving forward, and it just fit in perfectly for it. So that's what the title is, it's Thing with Feathers. Yeah. This is like the sketched out steelworks there, so I'm going to sew into that and I'm going to paint it, and then I'm going to like applique freehand embroidery, loads of birds over the top, lots of swallows, and lots of plants along the bottom, lots of weeds and foliage. Well, this is a sale. I had to source this from. This is why I'm quite late starting as well, because it took me a long time to get this sale. I've been down to South Gare. I met some bright characters down there at the houses on, you know, the huts on stilts. Have you been down there? Went and had an hour with Jacko, and anyway, that was non-productive, but that was amazing going down there. So I'd like to go back and maybe do something about them after this project. And then I went to Hartlepool Marina and met a really nice guy there who was super helpful, and he sourced this from a social club that had been hanging up on the wall for years, but it wasn't there anymore, so he traced it down to some shed somewhere and it had just been dumped in a corner, so finally it's here. So I got 2 massive sales, so I've cut this one down, and I plan to extend the work out again by sewing the sale back together, but for now it's just this section. It was hard to find because they don't make canvas sales anymore. They're like a synthetic, whatever they are now. So it's quite a lot of years since these were made, because they get wet and they're not practical for sailors. They're only used on like some like vintage ships that they might want to keep with all the original features, but yeah, so this is a proper old one. Oh yeah. I like doing industry because I love Teesside, because I'm from here. But I love the way it turns out, because I tried projecting some stuff last week just as a shortcut, projecting my images on and drawing them that way onto the fabric. But it didn't work very well because it was too precise. I like to just draw from photographs, because then you get the nice wobbliness. So I draw it straight onto the fabric, and then I sew it. But because of the way that I sew, it's like freehand embroidery, so you can move the fabric around. That comes out a bit squiff and wobbly as well. So when I look at something, I think, has it got lots of little details in it? Because I like lots of like lines and steps and ladders and Yeah, and I didn't start off doing that, but I started off doing pictures of hares and kind of typical British wildlife, but looking a bit scraffily as well. So the scraffeliness of that kind of goes with the industry as well. I think it kind of, works well together.
Fantastic.
Kind of stayed on a theme. So I've done a pylon with swallows flying in and out, just the embroidery, and I've got that printed, which was a good process for me because I've never done that before. It's what I wanted to learn about, was to reproduce some work. So far I've just done originals and sold them. So that was a good learning process to go through that, yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how different we all are actually, but we get on really well. They've all come from very different backgrounds and make really different art as well. But yeah, the days we've had together have been really good, and they've been really helpful actually. And Nick was quite helpful, talking about printing and stuff. Basically to be able to sustain it so I can make some money from it, to be able to carry on really. I'm working part-time and doing this. I'd like to leave my job, so I need to. The reason I was wanting to do this thing with Navigator North was to learn that, how to make a living out of what I do, rather than just dribs and drabs and never feeling like I dare ask for the right amount of money, and not knowing how to do limited editions, for instance, or merchandising. So next I really want to go back to South Gare and do another project there. And then I'd like to make some kind of reproduced work from that maybe. And
My work usually revolves around themes like chance and time, and it's usually a kind of exploration of my own control over the process of making something. It varies from project to project, and like with this work as part of the latest edition project, it's something quite new for me. It's a little departure from what I've done before, but I suppose people would recognise my work as being pretty tightly controlled, whilst also dealing with themes like chance, as I mentioned. Experimentation is at the heart of the work, and I like to find processes or objects that I don't have full control over, and they have their own character. So in a lot of the more recent work, there's been a kinetic element, and it's been to do with, or I suppose drawing has been my means of testing that process. So for instance, with the time casting project, it was a simple quartz clock movement that was the sort of starting point for a piece of work, and there was a lot of experimentation with that before it got to the point where I actually showed any work, created a piece of work. So several years of I suppose it's sort of pseudo-scientific approach that I take to playing with these objects, but play is always at the centre of it as well. Both the Festival of Thrift and the other venues that the work will be shown at will probably have quite a broad audience, a broad range of different types of people. So I hope that the work can operate in different ways for different people, and people can get something from it. And you know, you can enjoy it as a very immediate kind of playful experience. That's what I hope the work will do, so that actually you know, it will appeal on that immediate level of there something's happening here, and perhaps there's a sort of structure or system to it, and maybe I'm affecting it, maybe I'm involved in the process of making it do that thing, and that's a very immediate thing. And then maybe there's some other layers to the work that people might be interested in finding out about, maybe not, but it doesn't matter actually so much to me if people can get something from it, that, you know, at whatever level, that's great. You know, it's a very different way of showing your work to how I've done it previously, and I always enjoy that engagement with people, so, you know, it'd be interesting to see what people make of it. Yeah, so as part of the latest edition project, we are all making a limited edition print. I have made an attempt to make a connection between the limited edition and the work I'm making. The work that I plan to make will be a floor-based installation that will involve several dozen small motor-powered fans, which will each interact with a flag. So the housings for those little flags and the motors are they're all laser cut custom components that I've been making myself, and I'm quite interested in the craft of making things generally. Lots of my work previously has been focused on drawing, and this time I'm quite keen to look more at the sculptural side of my practice. It's designed to be something which you view as a field, so you can kind of look at one element of it and appreciate it as an individual unit, but also see it as a whole, and the whole will interact. So there'll be a structure or a system that's present there that I hope, you know, maybe people start to get a sense of. The flags themselves have come from a design that is featured. It's been arrived at through making the screen print. Essentially, the screen print is like a loose key to the larger work, the floor-based sculptural work I'll make. Some of the research I've been doing recently has been around modernism, particularly local architecture and some local modernist buildings that we've lost. So one in particular I'm interested in is the old police headquarters in Middlesbrough, which was pulled down, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. And it was never really a loved building. And having spoken to a few policemen who worked there, it was loved by neither the public or the staff that worked in the building. As a building, it was quite an interesting one. For some of the, you know, we haven't got a lot of modernist architecture on Teesside, and it was quite a challenging building, and it was design led, and it was of its time in that sort of welfare state, sort of post-war welfare state period. You know, those types of buildings, I think, have been a bit of an inspiration in terms of how they look, the grid structure perhaps that they're often based on, and the simplicity of design. I think that's something that I'm keen to look at. So you'll find that in the work and in the print, you might get some sense of the visual structure of the building, but it's definitely an abstraction from there, and it's one of several references in the work. I think it was an interesting building, and they used to have these big relief panels on the top of the building, if you remember it. I mean, there's an image up here that, those murals were actually based on maps of the town centre, and then there was an artwork commissioned, a relief artwork commissioned alongside to on one facade of the building also. So there was a real commitment to sort of cultural value in the building and it representing place. And whether it was successful in that aim, I don't know. But I think it's quite different to contemporary architecture, and I think we've lost some of that sensitivity towards what local people want and how it serves the town, you know, and represents the town. So I think, you know, things have changed a lot, and I think it's kind of it's an interesting area. The title for the work is taken from an Einstein quote, which is spooky action at a distance, and it's quite a sort of, I realise it's another reference which is a world away from the idea of modernism, the structures and the visual structures in the work. But in a sense, I don't see it as being completely separate. But the quote "spooky action at a distance" is something that Einstein said in a debate with the theoretical physicist Niels Bohr, when they were talking about quantum mechanics and the problem of quantum mechanics in describing how particles are connected to, entangled is the term I understand it by. And in theory, according to Niels Bohr, two particles could be light years apart, but would still affect one another. And there's been scientific studies that show that's true. In separate labs, you measure one and it stops the other one being visible, and vice versa. So there's an area of science which is still 50 years later or more still not really understood. We're still working on it. So that's kind of an interesting area for me. That's a question that no one in the world is yet able to answer sufficiently. And I think that quote still, it's still an interesting one. That spooky action at a distance between objects, and so that has been an inspiration in terms of the structures I use. So there'll be these little wind-powered flags. There's a sort of thing going on there where you've got a physical object moved by something it's not quite touching. That fan. So there's a sort of distance there, but also these will be paired so that throughout the composition you'll have these relationships going on. So it's a sort of reference to what Einstein was getting at as well.
I guess it was in sort of second year of university at Leeds College of Art. I was primarily looking at being an illustrator and sort of creating work that was using sort of pen and ink drawings, and second year sort of delved into ceramics. I saw the work of Laura Carlin and kind of immediately just fell in love and thought, right, I want to make some little ceramic animals. And in the end, I kind of made a series of plates and royal memorabilia based on Kate and Will's wedding back in the day. And just really loved the idea of creating sort of almost physical illustrations, as it were, kind of sort of painting onto objects in sort of my illustrative sort of style. And it kind of led on from there, and I started making sort of more functional items and the decorative ornaments, and I've kind of not really looked back. I think the nature of making something and it being used is really exciting, rather than just sort of having it hung up on the wall or sort of taken down and rolled up and put in a drawer for a bit. It's a different dynamic, and something sort of clicked, I think, when creating work, like ceramic work. I think if I go back to paper and pen now, it's still that sort of rigid thing of the pen doesn't move along the paper as how it would with a brush and paint. It's not the same. It's not as fluid or easy, and it doesn't look like my work almost, which probably sounds strange. It's just, I feel like my style sort of belongs in the ceramic form. Usually use the term wonky pots. Sort of quite naive and quite playful. I work usually from like a very rough sketch and kind of create, sort of go quite freehand usually to sort of get that sort of playful element. I think if you look too closely at the sketches and sort of have quite a uniformed way, it kind of loses the charm. I think when I start overthinking it and looking at it too much, then it becomes a problem, and then it starts to become uniform. I think if I just kind of stop looking too closely and kind of just keep going with it, I tend to try and finish a piece in one go rather than stopping and coming back to it all the time. I'm quite quick with the process as well, so I tend not to take too much time kind of carefully doing each sort of illustration and sort of kind of completely zone out and just keep going with it, and it usually like 90% of the time comes out how it's supposed to, or how I picture it in my head. So, and I kind of want to make work that is affordable for sort of the general public, and create products that I like to buy from other artists that are affordable and that you can sort of take a piece of that home. I do a lot of markets in London as well, where it's nice to be able to chat to people and find out what other people are making and share ideas. But then there's another side to my practice that is perhaps more artistic in the way that I get to sort of pick my own brief and kind of play around and explore ideas that are personal to me or that I'm interested in that moment in time, and then sort of exhibit and sell these works in sort of a more, say, established capacity. So currently selling in a shop in Mayfair called The New Craftsman. So that work is maybe more sort of one-off and higher price than, say, a pot that I sell on my own like online store, or that is more of a commercial item like a magnet or a tea towel. So I've got the two separate practices going side by side. Yeah, it seemed really interesting, the idea of creating some work in the sort of the Teesside areas. It's not an area I've been familiar with, and it's kind of allowed me to discover sort of new places and sort of getting to know people from that area as well, other artists. Looking around the Kirkleatham estate and kind of sort of did a tour around the estate and had an explore, and I was quite intrigued by the walled garden. It kind of been left for sort of disrepair and sort of overgrown, and I just kind of thought, how did it look back then? What was going on in there? I'm not into sort of gardening myself. I wish I could be, but I thought this is a chance to kind of understand what went on here. Why has it been left in the state that it has? So I looked in the archives and tried to find out a bit of information about the garden itself, what used to be, and I was quite intrigued to find out that it used to contain hot houses, and it used to sort of provide food for the estate and the house, and it once grew pineapples, which was a sign of quite an affluent Victorian family. They would have had a head gardener, and it all seemed to bring back all these images of sort of, all the Victorians and the outfits, and sort of creating the idea that they were making sort of growing sort of exotic fruits. I thought was quite amazing to be having that in Kirkleatham estate. So I took myself to Preston Hall and asked the head gardener there about information sort of about how a Victorian kitchen garden would have worked, and I just sort of looked at their walled garden and sort of saw the plants and vegetation. And so my work sort of pots based on sort of very loosely Christopher Dresser designs from the Linthorpe pottery, which obviously is a big close connection in Middlesbrough, and sort of looked at the shapes and the colours of the glazes and transferred my themes of like the Kirkleatham walled garden, how I imagined the hot houses to look like, and all the plants growing, and the gardeners at work with their apprentices, and sort of creating that story and sort of thinking back to the past of how it was, but also bringing the viewer's attention to how the garden is now and what the future plans are for the Kirkleatham estate. The mentoring sort of for this project, a few ideas have been thrown back and forth, but I think from us all working together as a group, so all the sort of what they say, the established artists working alongside the other artists, we kind of on the sessions that we've been having, it's been kind of we've been exploring ideas together rather than it just being Becky and I. So Nick or Teresa might have some input, or Carol or Diane might you know, have some suggestions. So as a mentor, it's almost like we're all mentoring each other rather than it just being one of us. So I've been able to get some great feedback on my own work and to think about ideas differently or what could be achieved that I would probably never have even thought of. So it's kind of like it's not just a sort of a two-way thing between Becky and I, but it feels more like a group sort of effort, which is really nice. I didn't expect that. Yeah, so the more affordable merchandise that is going to be there to sell at the venue is I'm making a tote bag. So it'll have images of some wonky pots, of course, and it'll have some images of like some of the pattern designs that are found on some of our pots, like images of leaves and vegetation, plant life, sort of within the pots. So it's kind of referencing my work for the exhibition, but in quite a decorative sort of illustration on a tote bag. I have briefly thought about it. I guess it's sort of an enjoyment to look at it and think, you know, obviously usually my work's quite playful, or it could be seen as maybe quite sweet in some ways, or quite maybe deemed as cute. So I guess people probably have sort of good feelings towards it, hopefully. But I think, yeah, just that enjoyment of having an object that brings, you know, a space or a room, some character, or can add something to their home, something that can be sort of treasured or kept and enjoyed and, you know, possibly passed down in some way. I think, especially with the ornaments, there's some, each one's often quite unique. It's got a different sort of glaze pattern to it, or it's hand built from scratch. So I think to have something that is completely unique, it just brings a sense of, you know, enjoyment, whereas a mass-produced item, say from IKEA or whatever, it's kind of a enjoy it for 2 seconds and then forget about it and put it in the back of the cupboard sort of thing. So I guess it's that difference of, you know, also how it's made, the story of where it's come from, and, you know, the idea that it's made locally or it's made in the UK, not just made in China. It's, yeah, something to be more sort of treasured rather than ignored.
Art was always my favourite lesson at school. Our art teacher was the only teacher that would let us have the radio on in the classroom. And I liked drawing better than I liked doing anything else. So that was, and when I went off from school, I thought, I'm going to do the thing that I like doing the most. And I started off collecting driftwood, thinking, oh, I'll make something out of all this driftwood. And then there was sage tide in January. It's like the middle of January, there was a big sort of sage tide, and the sea had gone right into the dunes, and we were out watching the sea coming in. And the next day, I was out with the dog as usual, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing, how much plastic had washed up. So I came back with 50 bottle tops and a doll's arm, and I was like, I can't believe this. Look at all this I've got. And that started so for the next month, I was literally just picking up plastic bottles and binning them that were left over from the sage tide. And ever since, I've kind of got addicted to just finding things and collecting it, and gobsmacked at the amount of plastic that I'm finding on the beach. Not just occasionally, every day. But I also found like really old things, like I found a Frey washing up liquid bottle, Sony Walkman case, just stuff that's like must have been floating around in the sea forever. Once I started collecting it, I guess as an artist, my natural instinct is then to think, right, what can I do with this? I've found all these things. So I just started laying them out and photographing them in a kind of recording what I'd found kind of way. Like, look what I found, can't believe I found this, look how many of them I found. And then I think as a textile designer, I just started making patterns that I just started repeating it And I think that kind of instinctively is what I do with things, whether it's a drawing or an object. So I started repeating those things and making patterns out of those things, and then people were like, oh, that's really nice. I say it's only been really since January, and this is kind of the second big exhibition that I've been involved in. And now it's kind of, I want to raise awareness of the issue that I wasn't aware of this time last year even, through the work that I'm doing. So it's like, look at all this stuff. I might have made a nice pretty pattern out of it, but it's still pretty grim. And we need to kind of let a wake-up call of, you know, so what I originally started doing was make whatever I collected that day or that week, so it's kind of a time-based thing almost. I would just arrange that and then like kind of mirror image it and repeat it. And it would just, like, I think the first time I did it, I was like, oh, that's like almost like a kaleidoscopic kind of pattern. Happened quite by accident, because of some other things I've been doing. And because on Instagram, you can get a little thing that twists things and does it for you, like quite instantaneously. And once I'd done one, I was like, oh, that's actually quite nice. I'll be a bit more considerate about where I'm putting things now. And now it's got to the stage where I've colour organised everything because I've got so much. And I will and I'm almost using like paint. I'm taking it out and arranging those colours and moving the shapes about, because one shape, once it's repeated, is a nicer shape than it is when it's kind of just itself. Festival of Thrift is about that kind of recycling and using what we've already got rather than making more things. Yeah, so we're doing a limited edition poster, so I wanted that to be different. Like we went and visited Kirkleatham Hall, and I looked around there for some inspiration. And there was a Gertrude Bell exhibition in there with some kind of sort of tiles. So that was kind of nice kind of pattern. I kind of tried to recreate that pattern, but then I sort of changed my mind and just used the colour story from that. So I wanted the limited edition print to be something that was instantly recognisable. So I'm just using a circle. And then people would realise what it was kind of after they'd kind of sort of seen the shape. So I wanted to stick with that being something quite simple. And also that's kind of the commercial part of this. So I think something like poster-wise, somebody recognises as quite a kind of simple shape would be kind of effective in that way as well. Whereas the print's going to be kind of more of a kaleidoscopic kind of print that I'm going to do, but using the same colour. Because my idea's been quite organic, having somebody go, you know what, if you thought about it like this, so I'm thinking about it like a lot harder. You know, the way I'm presenting the work, the way I'm thinking about kind of putting it into collections, the way I'm thinking about the colour and the actual kind of meaning of the object. Whereas I kind of started off just, well, collecting it and making patterns out of it now, but kind of sort of putting more thought into the actual process of using the objects that I've found. So yeah, so that's been really great because he kind of thinks in a totally different way than me. He's quite kind of organised, methodical and kind of mathematical about what he does, and I'm a bit like throw it up and see what sticks. So it has made me kind of I'm going to start weighing out the things that I've found and thinking about like the amount of plastic. So the next piece that I'm going to do is I'm weighing out enough that I can within one print it's going to be a ton of plastic, even like, so it's going to be a kilo repeated 1,000 times, so that's actually a ton. So we can think about like the amount that's in there. So visually, you're seeing like that much. That's not even a fraction of what, you know, of what's in the sea. So I think that's what's good about the Festival of Thrift, is it does attract that audience where like there is a certain, like say, reserve sometimes of people who will and won't go to art galleries. So you're getting that message out to more people. And I think I just want them to kind of realise, I mean, we live, you know, on the most beautiful bit of coast. Realise what you've got, because I'm not from the northeast of England. I'm from, like, we used to have to spend 3 hours in the car to get to the seaside when I was a nipper. So it's like, look at what you've got. You don't appreciate just how beautiful it is because it's always been there, you know, and like, maybe for them to go, oh yeah, actually, yeah, we should go to the beach. Next time I go to the beach, I'll put 3 bits of plastic in the bin. So I just want them to take that message away. If they appreciate the art as well and go, oh, she's made a lovely thing, then that's just a bonus, I think, to me. I'm just hoping that, you know, people just see the work and just respond to it. It's not asking them to do anything. It's just asking them to think a little bit harder about, you know, the consequences of our behaviour. And I think art whether it's music or writing or film or whatever, because all those things are kind of get to people quicker than anything else. It's kind of gets to you quicker than another way, because you're not being talked at, are you? Just kind of being communicated with, if that makes sense.